Another huge day in court, another crippling blow for our most decorated living war hero. His appeal dismissed, more costs to pay to the Nine Media Group, who left the court delighted.
Hello, welcome to Media Watch. I'm Linton Besser, and we turn tonight to a landmark moment in the battle between Australia's most decorated soldier and its most decorated journalist, with former SAS Corporal Ben Roberts-Smith suffering a grave defeat and the Age's Nick McKenzie celebrating an historic win.
The finding is utterly compelling. Ben Roberts-Smith did do these things. Ben Roberts-Smith is a war criminal.
It's now been 7 years since McKenzie first published allegations that the Victoria Cross recipient had killed or was complicit in the killing of 4 prisoners while serving in Afghanistan. 2 years ago, Roberts-Smith failed in an attempt to sue for defamation. He appealed that decision, and on Friday, the full court of the Federal Court delivered its verdict.
Having carefully considered all these matters, we are unanimously of the opinion that the evidence was sufficiently cogent to support the findings that the appellant murdered 4 Afghan men.
The court's complete judgment will not be released until tomorrow to allow the government to vet it for any security concerns. But it has delivered its full verdict on Ben Roberts-Smith's sensational and last-minute allegation of a conspiracy in which Nick McKenzie had exploited improper access to the ex-soldier's legally privileged material. And the central evidence for this claim? An 85-second snippet of a phone call between McKenzie and one of Nine's witnesses in the case, a woman known only as Person 17, in which he tells her he has sources who are
briefing us on his legal strategy in respect of you.
On the tape, McKenzie also said,
"No, I shouldn't tell you. I've just breached my ethics in doing that. This is put me in a shit position now."
For Roberts-Smith, a smoking gun. Hard evidence McKenzie had engaged in willful misconduct by unlawfully accessing privileged legal material. On Friday, however, 3 eminent justices dismissed the allegations and said the recording was ambiguous, unreliable and, crucially,
there is no way of knowing how long the whole conversation was and what topics were being discussed before and after this decontextualised snippet. Nor can one be confident that the contents of the recording have not been doctored.
In contrast to Roberts-Smith's attack on McKenzie's conduct, Friday's ruling found the reporter to be a witness of credit, and that his desire to reassure a sensitive witness and his apparently incriminating words on the tape
indicates that he had an incentive to exaggerate. He may also have had an incentive to try to earn Person 17's trust by suggesting that he was taking her into his confidence and risking his own position.
And as for the mystery of who was behind the recording,
we accepted that on the balance of probabilities, it was established that Person 17 made the recording and at some point communicated it to at least one other person.
The court did not make a finding as to who sent the recording to Roberts-Smith's lawyers, a potential criminal act, and it certainly made no suggestion that it was Person 17. But it did raise the possibility that whomever did so might have desired harm to come to Nick McKenzie. If so, they certainly hit their mark.
War crimes shock.
Explosive secret recordings.
Unethical journo in the line of fire.
Break law to get a story.
Published by The West Australian, these articles failed to acknowledge the paper's proprietor, Kerry Stokes, who had helped to fund Ben Roberts-Smith's case, had a pecuniary interest in blowing up Nine's defence. Not least because the total court costs are estimated to have run to almost $30 million. Stokes' television arm also papped Nine chairwoman Catherine West.
Catherine, why are you avoiding us?
After damaging allegations, Nine had agreed a secret deal with Person 17, buying her silence for $700,000.
Did you sign off on the $700,000 hush money payments?
Which Roberts-Smith claimed on Friday had prevented Person 17 from giving
direct evidence of Mr McKenzie's use of my privileged material during the trial.
Ben Roberts-Smith says he will continue the fight and on Friday pledged to take his case to the High Court. But the fact this story and the events surrounding it have twice withstood such exacting and forensic scrutiny, endorsed by no less than the full Federal Court, is a resounding vindication, not just of those whistleblowers in uniform who exposed the monstrous acts of Australia's most famous soldier, but also for the great and necessary enterprise of investigative reporting. And now we turn to this regular slot on 2GB's Drive Time show, hosted by Clinton Maynard.
On Sydney Now, the Straight Shooters.
She can handle the truth, and she is, of course, our straight shooter on Wednesday afternoon. The wonderful, the fabulous Lucy Zelich. Hello, my friend.
Yes, is there any straighter shooter than football commentator turned professional provocateur Lucy Zelich, who had in her crosshairs the shoddy standard of modern schools?
I was phoned by a parent this afternoon to tell me that this is going on in their particular area, a Catholic school in the Hills district where they do have a furry.
A furry, for the uninitiated, is apparently someone who puts on an animal costume now and then. But for Lucy Zelich, it's a much more insidious practice in which children identify as animals and are being encouraged to do so inside the walls of our schools.
It is a dog. The students have been instructed that when this child barks like a dog, they are to act as though this is completely normal. This is also occurring in Brisbane. They have placed litter boxes in the classrooms for them.
And as you'd expect from a straight shooter, Zelich had thoroughly investigated whether these allegations had any basis and was careful to put them into their proper context. Nah, just kidding.
It is a disgrace. And it's an absolute and utter embarrassment that we as a Western society have allowed things like this to happen.
Instead of journalism, she offered this heartwarming piece of maternal wisdom.
How about you give your kid a smack and teach them some respect, not put on a damn collar and act like a dog in a classroom?
Not to be outdone by his guest, and with the switchboard in meltdown, Clinton Maynard took up the cudgels 2 days later.
Apparently there's something like 1 billion hits on our different forms of social media, and we've had hundreds and hundreds of comments from people who have had some exposure to furries.
The cat, or the dog as the case may be, was well and truly out of the bag, as talkback callers dialed in with dubious, unverified claims of furries on the rampage, which Clinton Maynard duly put under the blowtorch.
Gail, you're a grandmother. You know a little bit about this.
Yes, I've just through my granddaughter from about 4 years ago. There was a group of girls that were identifying as different animals. One in particular was a cat.
First I heard of this was at a lunch with my 2 nephews. There was a girl in the class who used to wear cat's ears. She was served a bowl of milk and would be on her hands and knees to drink the milk.
Then, plot twist, Clinton Maynard's investigations turned up a bona fide government whistleblower. Well, a girlfriend of Pam's anyway.
Pam on the email. I've got a friend who's a proofreader for the Education Department. Now, she's told me it's part of Education Department policy that if a child comes to school as a dog or a cat, or a boy one day, a girl the next day, the teachers are not allowed to say a word.
Oh, so this isn't really about so-called furries, is it? But perhaps most shocking of all, a decision by Clinton Maynard to actually pick up the phone and do some checks.
We'll get an explanation next week from the Education Department, because I did not realise this was as big an issue as it clearly is. This ain't right at all.
I'm sorry? What's not right, Clinton? Children wearing fancy dress or the rubbish you put to air? Turns out it's the latter.
The Minister's office tells us they don't have any evidence that this sort of furry behaviour is happening in public school classrooms.
The Catholic schools body also rejected Maynard's allegations.
The Catholic Education Department says furries are not recognised by Catholic teaching.
A denial to which he applied his very professional scepticism.
That doesn't mean they're not sitting in a classroom and being allowed to lick themselves if they're a little bit dirty, or eat out of a bowl, or relieve themselves in a litter tray.
I mean, honestly. The following day, the Independent Schools Association also told 2GB the whole thing was utter tosh.
No, furries and furry behaviour is not allowed in the classroom. They say that it appears the information that we've received from you is incorrect, so there's some confusion somewhere along the line.
Yeah, somewhere along the line, Clinton. Because how many times now have versions of this stupid story been debunked? Like by AAP in this fact check when the bogus claims last surfaced in Queensland. We asked 2GB to defend its journalism and, frankly, the sheer acuity of its radio hosts. A spokesperson said the program aired the segment
in response to significant listener and social media correspondence. The program made clear the claims were unverified.
Oh, well, that's all right then. Now, if you're wondering why this zombie story simply won't die, it has nothing whatsoever to do with students dressing up like cats and dogs, and nothing to do with the standard of education in this country. Rather, it's a clumsy attempt to stir moral panic and use sheer tittle-tattle to bait outrage in a bid to drive up listeners. Heaven save us if it actually works. And finally, a postscript to a story we brought you last week about how the West Australian newspaper, owned by AFL broadcaster Seven West Media, treated the happy news that a rival football code was coming to town.
The bad news bears. Rawr.
Rugby mad Roger Cook forces WA taxpayers to pay Sydney's NRL reject $65 million to play in Perth.
Last Thursday, a further development sure to delight Seven's owner, Kerry Stokes.
Well, the NRL's newest franchise, the Perth Bears, have their first employee. Seven West Media executive Anthony DeSegli, a surprise selection as the club's CEO.
Yes, Stokes' man jumping ship. Seven West Media's editor-in-chief poached by the chairman of Rugby League to run the very NRL team invading AFL territory and putting Seven in a lather. A tremor ran through Seven's headquarters when the news came over the radio.
Anthony DeSegli, who's a senior executive at Channel 7 and a right-hand man to Kerry Stokes, is in fact going to be leaving the Seven network, and he is going to be the inaugural chief executive of the Perth Bears.
Columnist Mark DiStefano reported DeSegli was standing in the middle of the newsroom when that rang out.
One person said eyes around the newsroom slowly turned to the news boss, who muttered, "It's true," before walking off.
Even Kerry Stokes himself was apparently blindsided, with a senior Seven source telling The Australian,
"He's absolutely livid and sees this as a sign of treachery. After everything he's done for him, he's not happy."
Meanwhile, the NRL cheerleading Daily Telegraph had a bit of fun at Kerry Stokes' expense.
Stoking the bear.
How Rugby League pinched Kerry's man to grow the code in AFL country.
It was a short ride on the TV train for DeSegli, whose radical shake-up at Seven briefly included horoscopes and horseplay. Nine's The Sydney Morning Herald checked the markets and reported Seven's share price had climbed 6.5% on news of DeSegli's exit. Not an industry for the faint of heart. But were there warning signs that Kerry Stokes missed? After Seven dispatched DeSegli in March to rub shoulders with Rugby League chairman Peter V'landys and other NRL power brokers in Las Vegas, there were reports he came back and persuaded his AFL-loving boss to sign off on a new NRL show on the Seven network. Kerry, I'd be pissed too. The West Australian's editor Chris Dorr, apoplectic about the state's financial support of the Bears, has published a run of heavy-hitting editorials castigating the WA Premier over the deal. So how did his newspaper treat the DeSegli story? With tremendous prominence, of course.
Highly respected newsman Ray Cooker has been promoted to lead Seven's national news team.
Yes, sunny days ahead, with DeSegli's electrifying exit from the Seven empire relegated to a mere footnote. Anthony DeSegli told us he was very much focused on his new role, and for our part, we wish him well for his foray into the world of 130-kilo front rowers and crushing tackles, which, after a career in newspapers and television, will feel like kindergarten. And that's all from us tonight. Be sure to check us out on ABC iView as well as YouTube and Facebook. You can find full statements on our website. And don't forget to send us your tips. See you next week.